Please rise and join in the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Please be seated. First item is approval of the agenda. I'll move it.
Second?
Second by Taylor. Hearing no corrections. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item, or 4-0, excuse me. Mr. Radig is out of town and unable to call in. Items 2 through 7 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items passed unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 2 is approval of the minutes of the September 19th meeting. Item 3 is approval of the claims. Item 4 from the Deputy Commissioner of Elections includes A, receive the appointment of Kirk Moriarty as Sergeant Bluff Councilman to replace Bill Gockel, and B, receive the appointment of Donald Solzberger as Mayor of Smithland to replace Elizabeth Peterson. Item 5 from Human Resources is approval of the Memorandum of Personnel Transactions. Item 6 from the County Treasurer is approval of resolution naming depositories to correct name from First National Bank in Sioux City to Northwest Bank. And item 7 from Secondary Roads is approval of a permit to work in the right-of-way for Jeremy Hackett and to direct the chair to sign the permit. I'll move the consent agenda. Second by Nelson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Item 8 from Secondary Roads, County Engineer Mark Nera for action includes A, receive bids for PCC patching and return them to the County Engineer for review and recommendation.
Do we have any bids? Thank you. We have one bid from 10 Point Construction. That'll be easy to keep track of. Total bid is $59,250. 59250. We'd like to get this done before fall. I don't think there's time to necessarily go out and obtain other bids. $100 per patch by count is close to what we've been paying in the past. I'd recommend approval.
Well, first I'll move to receive item A.
First, sorry
Second.
about that.
Second by Taylor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Item B is to award the bid if low quote is clearly determined by bid results, which it is, so I'll move to approve that. To repeat that again, Mark?
10 Point Construction,
For,
$59,250. They're from Denison, Iowa.
second by Nelson? Binger? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Item C is approval of plans for project number parent 149.
This project is to pave 250th Street from Highway 31 to County Road L27. This is a couple miles south of Anthon. We graded this project using money from the Special Projects Levy. Work was completed in 2021 with the final seeding on it. We've allowed it to go through a couple of winters. The remaining funding in the special projects levy was only $375,000 after we got 13 bridge or culvert replacements and the grading done with it. So we transferred that money a number of months ago to our farm to market program, our farm to market fund in Ames, and we'll use farm to market to fund the balance of getting this job done. We're looking roughly 1.8 million in the total paving. But I recommend approval of the plans.
I'll move it.
Second.
Second by Taylor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0.
Let's get 1959.
We are ahead of our 4:45 PM set time, which is item 9A, which is a public hearing. In the meantime, Supervisors Taylor and Nelson were kind enough to submit an agenda item to give us something to talk about before that item. So we'll move to item 10, which is approval to give direction for a new proposed ordinance in regards to utility scale solar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this item is a follow-up to the last public hearing meeting and some further thought. I feel like in some ways this mirrors a little bit of our protracted discussion on wind, but in the end, I think we got that right. This is an option for direction to the Planning and Zoning Board of Adjustment for further consideration regarding utility scale solar. We have heard opinions and that there is some hesitation in terms of making a conditional use within agricultural preservation. So what we would like to do is put before the Planning and Zoning Commission and others a second option, and maybe even a third one tonight based on some comments from our Planning and Zoning Director. So this alternative would be to expand something called light industrial, of which there's only 101 acres out of 570,000 in Woodbury County, and that those landowners who desire utility scale solar be rezoned to this. Landowners could continue to farm the land, but open up an avenue that would be far preferable than perhaps agricultural preservation and much more appropriate. So some of the things that we considered would be still having a conditional use permit for a C within planning and zoning to be able to site specifically take into consideration the concern of neighbors, land and soil, and other factors. A slope of perhaps no more than 5% for fixed arrays, but we've learned, I think in our discussions, that most of these are now movable arrays, and so the intensity that is an effect on the land and soil conservation is probably not as present when there's movable arrays. No more than 1% of industrial land conversion every 4 years, so roughly 5,700 acres, so that there is a slow growth, and the utility scale solar, the notification for adjacent landowners that it be 1 mile instead of the typical 500 feet. And then we added in our discussions a decommissioning plan. That's something that we heard about at the public hearings. How do we have these decommissioned in such a way that's going to preserve the land for generations to come? Or are these just, basically abandoned, and what does the decommissioning look like? So that is kind of an overview. Supervisor Nelson, if you want to add in thoughts and comments.
A lot of the feedback that I've had from landowners, I was not able to attend the meeting in Mobile, but I've had 2 calls just in the last 4 days from farmer landowners in the county about this. And one of the things that they talk about is that they would not like to see this in the AP, although almost all of them have no problem with expanding the industrial or light industrial in some regard down in this area where industrial currently is. And so I think that it's worth looking at to see if this is something that's feasible. I think that if folks on both sides of this issue are kind of in the same realm that a light industrial or an industrial expansion would be their first choice, then I think that's something we could at least look at. And that's kind of the purpose of this, was just to give some direction to P&Z to look into that.
I think one of the other things that's been helpful throughout our discussions has been the clarification on taxes. So those who say, well, I don't want to be in industrial or I don't want to be in light industrial, well, it's irrelevant as regards taxation. So I think that's important, and it's something that's been good learning for me and maybe some others. So with that being said, this is an option. I've been very clear with planning and zoning. We're not telling them the recommendation that we're looking to hear. Otherwise, why even get a recommendation if we're telling them this is what we want to hear from you? So independently of us, this is a second option. There's a third one that we understand maybe something that Dan Priestley, our planning and zoning director, could speak to tonight. And what I'd like to do is hear about that, and then perhaps this is yet another option that could be considered, because somehow, some way, I think that there is potential for both of these things to exist. The preservation of agriculture and some limited solar, and how that coexists. Do you want to talk a little bit about, Dan?
Yes, the third option that you're referencing would be a concept called an overlay district. Where we started with was the option of putting a C in the entire district, and that pretty much would leave it in the hands of the commission to analyze if that's an appropriate area or not at the commission level. An overlay district is a similar factor as doing a rezone, but it's not instituting a new district. It's instituting an area over top of an existing zoning district called an overlay. So it is possible to look at a utility or a solar overlay district on a spot-by-spot basis across the county, and using that criteria or that basis for the other things that we're interested in looking at, whether it's slope, whether it's CSR, et cetera, and inserting that into a overlay debate on where the overlay district could be located across the county. And so, for example, you can involve the Board of Supervisors, the Zoning Commission, and the Board of Adjustment as far as analyzing an area. If somebody were to bring an application in, it would take the scrutiny of the Commission and the Board of Supervisors through the normal public hearing process to look at a particular area or a location to see if it could be acceptable for these solar arrays in this particular region. The problem that we run into with doing it with a straight zoning district, such as a general industrial or a limited industrial, is that we have to go back to the development plan and the land use map and see if it's directly linked to that. It would be virtually impossible to create a general industrial or a limited industrial in the middle of farmland. But as far as the overlay district, it leaves that open as a possibility. But in order to get to that overlay district, we can examine many and all of the concerns that have been brought to us with the CSR, the slope, and the various other criteria to decide whether or not an area would be acceptable across the board. If you're going to do an overlay, you could say that the overlay could be over any district or a specific district only. So it could be eligible only over a portion of agricultural preservation. And another thing that I think it's imperative to be clear on is this. We're not creating a district and painting it across the county right now. It would be a situational, case-by-case basis where ultimately, by going through an application, you are creating the overlay for the specific project area on a case-by-case basis in terms of allowing for the analysis of the area. So that adds the extra level or layer of the Board of Supervisors and the Zoning Commission to scrutinize whether or not that's an appropriate location under the overlay option.
Let's pause here. Dan, thank you. We have our 4:45 PM set time, which you're involved with as well. So we'll come back to this item, but right now we are in item 9A, which is a public hearing on a zoning ordinance map amendment to rezone agricultural preservation to the agricultural estates zoning district on parcel ending in 0006, which is Lot 2, Boyles Addition, for Richard and Kimberly Lucy. Public hearing is now open for anyone wishing to speak for or against this motion.
Kim and Rich Luzzi, address is 2480 Highway 20 in Lawton, Iowa. We are seeking for rezoning for the purpose of splitting off a portion of the land to build a new house, separate from the current house we own.
Understood. Anyone else to speak during the public hearing?
Hearing none, Mr. Chair, I move that the public hearing be closed.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Item B is approval of the second reading of the ordinance as the final reading. I'll move it.
Second.
Second by Nelson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Item C is approval to waive the third reading of the ordinance. I'll move it. Second by Bittinger. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. And item D is approval to adopt the zoning ordinance map amendment for a rezone. I'll move that.
Second.
Second by Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Thank you. We'll now return to item 10. Mr. Taylor, I think you were about to say something.
So I just had a couple of questions for Dan, if we can pick up where we left off. So one of the questions is, you said, in terms of the option that we're putting forward in front of the public tonight, it'd be very difficult to rezone in the middle of farmland. What if the present farmland is somewhat adjacent to? And I think just truth in kind of disclosing, or, you know, there's been some interest in the southern part around the Salix area, and that's where there were lines that once serviced one of the Neal plants that is currently not in use, which makes it, you know, maybe preferable in that area. So does that make a difference in terms of, I know you mentioned the development plan and the future land use map and all of that. Does that make it a more live round or not, given the fact that there may be areas that are adjacent to that landowners may voluntarily say, I'd like a look at being rezoned into this, and oh, by the way, it's not in the middle, you're not spot zoning in the middle of, this is, you know, 20 miles away from any industrial area, and I just want you to do it here. Does that make a difference? And what is the process if it does?
Yeah, rezoning has to be justified. As part of our ordinance, it is related to items such as the CSR as well as to the development plan as a whole. It helps to abut or be directly next to an area. So if you're touching industrial, you can justify that you're adding on to that region. But once you kind of exit that area and go to a separate parcel, then we are into that concept of the spot zoning, which is tougher to justify. As far as planning procedures, when you're making these decisions on where something should be in a particular area of the county, that's where we end up relying back on the development plan and looking directly at the map. I'm not saying it can't be done. A decision could be made to do that where you ultimately decide maybe it's appropriate, but if it doesn't have the backing of the plan as much, I would be uncomfortable recommending.
And how does that work in terms of practicality? Would we hear from, so there's another public hearing, and would planning and zoning and Board of Adjustment be making a recommendation? Ultimately, yes, we think this many acres in this particular area ought to be eligible, or would it be upon the landowner's petition to say, I would like to be looked at to see if 500 acres or 1,000 acres, or there's a group of us that wants to be looked at in this way? How does it work?
As far as the let's say a movement behind that we want to do this, I think it's helpful if you have lots of folks within an area that are in agreement. It would kind of help the commission along, but we would still run back into, okay, our plan says this hypothetically, but I do think that the public support behind it would obviously help, but having that justification layer underneath is very important. We are at a point where the county is in the works with the development plan with Simcoe and everything, and we do have an opportunity to look at the map when we start debating the underlying of the development plan. And I would suggest if there are areas that are transitional from agriculture to maybe more industrial use, that maybe we should consider that is for the long run, long protection of the county, to have that involved as part of that development plan. Without development plan justification, that's what brings me over to the overlay district scenario, where if you use an overlay district, it holds all the uses underneath it that are currently present on agriculture. And some of the counties that we have looked at, such as Lynn County or Scott County, they use the overlay district in a way that authorizes a new set of use within a particular area on top of an existing zoning district with some standards to get to there. They also have plans attached. One is a agricultural restoration plan, where they get the applicant to agree to return it back to agriculture after the season of having the panels in a particular way. They also require the decommissioning plans that have been referenced in there on what happens when this disappears. The use of an overlay district, when the use would expire, would return it back to the agricultural preservation if it had farm ground under there. What we had talked about in the past too is the issue as far as creating an industrial district or limited industrial would open it up in the future for industrial uses on top of that if you make that change to the industrial district versus using an overlay, which could ultimately expire based upon.
I like the overlay district in regards to how the supervisors can be involved with the process, but in a way, isn't it still kind of spot zoning, or how do you see it as not being spot zoning?
It's created as a special use for a unique scenario. I know Scott County kind of calls it creative or smart planning, but it's looking at the realities of the world economy and adjustments and changes based on land use, and it gives an opportunity to look at something that may not fit directly with the zoning. We do, in our current ordinance, have an example of an overlay with the conservation overlay district, where we can have some agricultural preservation out there, but we have an area that may be zoned in that big way, but it has special characteristics. So the supervisors, the zoning commission, have the ability to declare an area conservation district as far as going through that overlay district. And so we do have that as an example of something that we could hang the hat on as far as there is a function to have an overlay scenario. We can design the overlay with specific standards, requirements, down to the point as specific as setbacks or lock it into particular uses. Some of the counties have created the renewable energy overlay district that takes up the wind debate and the solar, so they kind of use it as a renewable way to kind of control the placement of where these are at. So if an overlay was considered, I think the commission should research very specific to how you can handle the actual approval of that district. What are the characteristics of the land that would either allow for it or not allow for it as far as the rezone procedure?
So is your understanding and visiting, I don't know if you've visited with our assistant county attorney about it, but as far as the process for creating the potential of an overlay district, has that been fleshed out as far as what would happen? And then the second part of that is, what gives breath to life for the overlay? Is it the actual application? Let's say that there's 16 landowners and they all raise their hand and say, we're coming forward and we would like this exact portion of our land to have this overlay. So I guess the first part of the question is, what puts the procedure in place that this is even a potential? And then secondly, is it, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's application-based, where it goes through Planning and Zoning, Board of Adjustment, and then comes before this board for ultimate approval of that particular overlay. Am I?
Yeah.
Hearing
Yeah.
you correctly?
Yeah, and so, yeah, we want to take it up further with the county attorney's office in terms of vetting it. I've briefly talked about other jurisdictions that have done that, so it's going to merit a large look at the process and how well it would hold up, and in terms of creating that as a whole. So that's something that the commission, I think, can definitely look at to see the effectiveness of creating that in the long last. And as far as the application, it would be kind of similar to the rezone process that we went through with this application tonight, where the application comes in for a project. We have kind of an idea of what the scope is, where the placement of everything is. And we would start off with that overlay district and debate it at the commission and the board of supervisors level as far as if that's a potential area. So this would end up being possibly a two-pronged approach, which Scott County has that, and Lynn County has that kind of scenario as well, where you get the overlay scenario approved and figured out, and then you can go back through the conditional use permit process. And the concepts that you've all have pointed out as far as having enumerations or added features as far as the permitting requirements and expectations would definitely be part of a proposal, or added in there where they have a list of things that we check off if we're looking at safety, fencing, things that the applicant can come into knowing what the expectations are of the county. So I would see it as the applicant having to know that this area of land, can it get approved or can it not get approved? It would have to be fully transparent out there, and we would have to know whether our metric is CSR or slope, and have them submit to us in an application format something that's proving to us that this area is acceptable to even merit an application for that site. So it just depends on where we put the lines in the sand as far as here we are, this is what we expect specifically through that application. So we would have to evaluate it. The other thing that Lynn County does is they kind of have a scorecard, like a teaching rubric, where they have the Board of Supervisors approve this rubric separate from the ordinance, but they reference it in the ordinance, that is a determination tool, that you run the characteristics of the area through it and you basically grade it. And if it don't meet the score, then that can be a mechanism that decides whether the area is appropriate or not. So it kind of reminds me of how the state has us do the master matrix as far as the confinement scenario there. So that's kind of a creative way that Lynn has looked at it. But as a whole, it could be a double layer approach where you take it up through the supervisors, zoning commission supervisors, and then we would have to talk about decommissioning plans, road use agreement. There's things that are specifically required where the supervisors would need to be involved as far as the decommissioning plans, et cetera. So we almost end up with a area of focus just for the Board of Adjustment. We have an area of focus directly for the supervisors as well, where ultimately Commission and Board of Adjustment would basically be deciding the permit and everything once it's fully vetted as far as the overlay district. Again, this is quite a hypothetical that definitely needs full scrutiny and a focus, and so we've got some steps to go through as an option, as with all of the menu of options that we have been given to look at. So we'll do that. And where we left off last night with the zoning commission meeting is they would like to be doing a kind of a work session where they'll have a public meeting and kind of get more into the nuts and bolts on what these criteria are. And our hope is to have some look at what is feasible, and we'll work with the county attorney's office on whether these type of processes we think would be a suitable fit from a legal standpoint.
So I would make a motion if that's okay, unless there's further discussion, Mr. Chair.
No, that's fine. I think is it fair to say this is, there's a long process with this involving planning and zoning and Board of Adjustments, so we're just giving them additional considerations as they go about their normal process, and it does take some time, so don't want the people out there to feel like we're not moving this ball forward because we're trying to give them as much to consider as we can.
Absolutely.
Is that a fair statement?
Very fair. There's lots of sub-variables and everything that we're going through.
Well, was there a motion then?
So I'd move to give direction for a new proposed ordinance in regards to utility scale solar to potentially rezone areas of light or limited industrial with certain upfront limitations, and giving an overlay option as well with upfront requirements for application on a project-by-project basis.
Sounds good.
So basically just giving a couple of directions or ideas. Dan, I want to compliment, did a very good job at laying out what we all had talked about in terms of here are three options. What would constitute three options at this point?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Second by Nelson. Any other discussion? Any public discussion? All right, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 4-0. Appreciate it. Item 11, reports on committee meetings. Mr. Taylor? Mr. Bittinger?
I'll start. We were in the WCICC meeting, just the backup center's going well. That's getting almost completed. So our backup of all of our systems, and just kudos to to John and all his staff and leaders, just doing a good job. Going on the offense, making sure that Woodbury County is protected from cyber threats and attacks. So just want to give a shout out to them, but that's all that I have.
Very good. Committee update regarding the LAC Authority and the project. Mr. Nelson and I just received word that from the Baker Group project manager that they have secured permissions for the two of us to tour the construction site tomorrow afternoon. That'll be noticed by the authority, and that was approved by the Vice President of Housing and Construction. We'll be on site with the superintendent, and it's our full intention to request and really push for the rest of the board to be invited out as well when it's feasible. But the tour will take place outside of project work. And that's what we have, so we'll have more to report on Tuesday.
Yep.
Any other reports on committee meetings? Item 12, any citizen concerns? Name and address in 3 minutes, please.
Deb Main, 1026 Charles Avenue. Last week, PHMSA sent a letter to the CEOs of all the pipelines, and I think Gail forwarded that to you. But in essence, it says that Congress has provided PHMSA with clear and exclusive authority to regulate the design, construction, operation, maintenance, and emergency response aspects of pipeline systems to protect life, property, and the environment from hazards associated with pipeline operations. PHMSA does not have the authority to regulate the siting of the pipelines, including carbon dioxide pipelines. Thus, the responsibility for siting and governing new carbon dioxide pipelines rests largely with the individual states in which the pipelines will operate. States and local governments may exercise powers granted to them by the federal and state law, regulating land use and setback distances of pipelines respectively, and that's part of the letter. So nothing in the federal safety law impinges on the traditional prerogatives of local or state government, as long as you don't get into the design, construction, operation, maintenance, and emergency response. So the 50-foot setbacks that we have are for gas lines to residences, not for carbon dioxide pipelines. So when you retain Timothy Whipple to represent our county, and I've seen several filings on the docket that have been submitted on behalf of our county. I believe that it grants our county the power to set ordinances for hazardous CO2 pipelines. So now would be the time to work with Mr. Whipple to set the guidelines that will protect our cities and citizens. So I was at the IUB meeting, and I kind of told them a little story about a Greek leader that was preparing his crew against pirate attack, and they were all grumbling about the whole procedure. They didn't want to do it, but he said, you know, if you don't prepare now, when they attack, it's too late.
Thank you. Any other citizen concerns?
Gail Palmquist, Lawton, Iowa. We have another new development the last couple of weeks with the pipelines. They not only want our land and our tax money, now they're asking for our water. I don't remember if I sent you anything on that or not. But anyway, Summit is submitting applications to the DNR asking for water permits to drill wells at each of the 13 ethanol plants in Iowa. One has already been approved. That's at Lawyer, Iowa. And apparently they're putting notices in the local newspapers in the small print section that none of us ever read, you know, unless we're looking for something specific. And it got approved. Another one at Eagle Grove is in the process right now. And they're kind of sneaky about it. They're not putting Summit Carbon Solutions on the title. They're using the name of the ethanol plants, like it was the Lawyer Permit LLC or something like that. You had to look to find out that it was connected to Summit Carbon Solutions. Public comments on the second one that they're asking for at Eagle Grove are being accepted by the DNR until October 14th. And we would like to have our Board of Supervisors object to these wells that they want to dig. You'll understand why in a minute. Jimmy Powell is the COO of Summit, and I don't know if he's been here at any meetings, but he speaks out for them a lot. And he says the amount of water needed by each plant would be 70 gallons a minute. This would amount to 478,297 gallons per year per plant. And Bleeding Heartland is the group that is doing the studies on this. And this is probably a conservative amount because that's only 1 year for one plant. And we have to think about, they're probably going to do this in all 5 states that the pipelines are going through. So they're going to be taking a tremendous amount of water out of our water sources here in the Midwest. Also, the wastewater is a problem. Wastewater will be released in the nearby creeks, which will empty into larger creeks, into rivers. You know how water flows down to the Mississippi. There's been no study as to what chemicals might be released in that process. One of concern is the triethylene glycol chemical, along with some CO2 that probably will be in it.
Gail, you're at 3 minutes, so.
Okay, I've got a little bit left. Can I finish?
There's always opportunity to present written comments for the board to receive into the record if you're not able to summarize your thoughts in 3 minutes.
Okay. I've got 2 addresses for you to enter complaints or protest with them, and I think it's necessary that we do so.
Okay,
We're already in a drought, so we don't need them taking more of our water.
thank you. Any other citizen concerns?
I'm Steve Nelson, 2805 West 4th in Sioux City. I'm the owner of Nelson Commercial Construction. I'm just here to talk about the project you're going to look at tomorrow, the Law Enforcement Center. As a taxpayer, property owner, I'm concerned that we're going to pay part of this bill for somebody else's mistake. And I don't feel the taxpayer should pay a dime. I think the estimate was like $1.8 million in 7 months extension. But part of my thing as a contractor, being involved with commercial projects, there's been conversation about the city approved these plans and the Houseman doesn't have any responsibility, which is obviously false because you have to build the building still to code. That has to happen. But there seems to be so many missed steps here between the architect, design, the engineers that we hired. Baker Group really dropped the ball here. This is their level of expertise with HVAC systems. They're supposed to be watching out for us. So the Baker Group's included, and of course Houseman. So there's some people out there that should be paying this bill, not the taxpayers. So I hope when you guys go out and look at this, that we don't pay any of the money. I know there's some remedies with E&O insurance, with Baker, the architect, our engineer, Houseman, so we have a bond with them, performance bond. So I hope we can remedy, those folks can come up with a solution and not cost the taxpayers any money with this project.
Steve, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your role in the project and what you know in terms of your company as a local company and what you've been doing?
I'm not involved with the project
Okay.
at all.
Okay.
Zero. And the only thing that I'm familiar with is, at this point, is the missed fire dampers and the fire-rated walls. I think there's some other issues, but they have nothing to do with a code enforcement deal. I think it's whatever it is, but I know the fire dampers is the big issue in the firewalls, which the building code that we're using is an international building code. It's not unique to Sioux City, where all of these entities involved use these codes throughout the whole country, Minneapolis, Des Moines. So this is not unique to Sioux City. These guys are big, large firms, their expertise. This should not have happened. In the city's responsibility, we take out permits. Every permit says at the end of it, we have to sign for it. We still have to build it to the IBC code of this local, federal, state level. You cannot catch everything in a set of drawings with the city. So it just goes back to the professionals that we hired, Baker Group, architect, engineers, in my opinion, just from other projects.
Appreciate it very much.
Yep. All right, thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that. And to follow up, it certainly is not my intention as chair, or I believe the board's intention to take any moves that would put the taxpayers at risk. We withhold all available remedies, and we're relying on council to effectuate that. There's plenty of blame to go around. Similar to filing an insurance claim with several payers, it feels like. And but the important thing is that the work is ongoing. Well, there is this back and forth process that's been previously communicated to the board as far as the construction company giving their estimate, followed by the project manager's estimate. The process takes, I'm told, about a month to play out until there's an actual estimate as far as a date from the LEC Authorities representative, which is the project manager. Right now, we're simply relying on the first stated worst-case scenario. So I want that to be understood, but appreciate the thoughts there, certainly agree. Any other citizen concerns? Hearing none. Item 13 is board concerns. I will mention that I'm scheduled to be out of town for work October 2nd through the 14th. I intend to call in for October 3rd and 10th for those meetings. In that case, Vice Chair Taylor will be acting chairman during that time. Any other board concerns? Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of things. First, I want to state publicly, I think it's a step in the right direction for the chairman of the Board of Supervisors and the LAC Authorities designee to be able to visit the Law Enforcement Center without the 10-hour OSHA training for transparency's sake. So I'm hopeful that Supervisor Bittinger, I think you brought it up last meeting, that you're able to follow. And so if we can do it while Keith Raddick's out of town, I'll join you. Number two, I know that we need to continue to monitor. Right now, I'm not supportive at this present point of giving more dollars or more funding until some of the entities have worked out some compromises and agreements. I'm very concerned about giving any more dollars at this point. And then third, just for transparency's sake, we brought up the maintenance fund, which will grow to $1.2 million by the end of this fiscal year and has a limitation that we have heard is $8 million that's directly being taxed of our citizens. My understanding, I talked to Shane from the Baker Group, there was this list that had supposedly come before the Board of Supervisors that may or may not have, may have come before the authority, but there will be a new list coming October 10th with the justifications for up to $8 million, and then again on October 24th. So I'm appreciative to be able to have that, and then to be able to digest that, and maybe also look to work locally too with some people in the construction industry and architects outside of the Baker Group or others to vet that, because I think that that's an important thing. Some who may look and say, well, whole cloth, we have to take whatever they say. I think that we can give some increased scrutiny and look at what is appropriate in that and the mechanism for them to be able to spend money. So those are appreciated to be able to have you guys out there and to be able to hear more about what we're taxing for a maintenance fund for the new building. So appreciate that very much.
Thank you. Any other board concerns? Mr. Bittinger, anything?
Do we know who was calling in tonight?
I do not know on the first one. I think the second one might have been Keith.
Okay. Is there a reason to decline or just?
That was disruptive to the meeting. If you're going to be here, going to do that, I appreciate if you call it on time.
Yeah, I do have a concern. I think if a supervisor's calling in, I don't think it's disruptive. I know last time that I tried to call in, I believe it was declined. I think if a supervisor calls in, even though he may not have given proper notice, I think that it's appropriate to take the call. And I was
The
appreciated
notice
to.
I was given was that he wasn't going to be able to call in.
Correct, but if he does call in, I think that it's appropriate to have a sitting supervisor be able to do that. I think it's not, and I would ask in the future, I was alerted that I was declined when I had given notice, so I'm appreciative if a supervisor calls in, for that person be able to attend. That's in our bylaws, and I appreciate it very much.
Who has this number, Karen? Just the supervisors? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can bring any clarity to any of this, but I believe 2 meetings ago, Mr. Raddick said he was going to be out of town and not able to call into this meeting. I have not heard from him since that he is able to call in, or I would have let somebody know. He has not texted me during this meeting that he has attempted to call in, which is what I would do if I was trying to call in and couldn't get in, but I didn't know what number was being on this,
And I do
open
not
meeting.
know for sure if the second one or the first one was him.
Okay. We'll ask him when he gets back.
You said the second one was him, as you had suspected, Mr. Gill? Okay, he texted you. Yeah, if we could have a sitting supervisor who calls in, even if it's not noticed. I know I did give notice last time I was denied. Would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, any other board concerns? We are adjourned.